welcome back to WJ Live. I'm George Upper, editor-in-chief of the Western Journal, and I'm joined today by Josh Manning, deputy managing editor, and our founder and publisher, Floyd Brown. Thanks for being here, guys. Before we get into our topics of the day, I just wanted to make a quick ask of everyone, because as we look at our statistics, we look at them, look at numbers and numbers every day, of course, we continue to see how many people are watching the podcast but not subscribed to our YouTube channel. And so it's such a big help to us for you to be subscribed. And so we ask you to do that. If you're not watching this on YouTube Live, if you're seeing it somewhere else, you can go to youtube.com/WJ Live. It's really simple to find us. Click that subscribe button, click the bell next to it so that you get notified every time a new podcast episode is available, because we don't want you to miss any of this. We do this for you. Our goal is to equip viewers and listeners with the truth. And we want to do that every day, Monday through Friday. We do it at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific, every weekday. We're going to keep doing that for as long as you let us. So you can help us out. It doesn't sound like much, but it really is a big help to us to just get on YouTube and click those two buttons.
And I just want you to know, George, I did it.
Did you subscribe
I did it.
to Western Journal?
I subscribed. I hit the little button, so I'm in.
That's pretty
I'm
impressive.
part of the family now.
Because Floyd does not like big tech, so when he does something on YouTube like that, that's pretty impressive. So be like Floyd and come subscribe to Western Journal. I'm sorry, to WJ Live on YouTube.
But you weren't the 1,000th subscriber.
No, that was you. That was you. Josh got us over that hump. And speaking of Josh,
yeah. So, believe it or not, I've got a story about polls.
Really?
Can you believe it?
I really don't know anything about polls, so this might be tough for me, but I'll see what I can do.
Floyd, I know you were saying ahead of time you just couldn't wait to talk about another story about polls.
I have a poll I like, though.
Do you have a poll you like?
Yeah.
Are we getting to it later?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. So the poll story I have actually isn't a specific set of polls. It comes from the New York Times. If you get their daily briefing in your email box every morning, I'm sorry for you. But I get it and read it, where sometimes we can run stories so you don't have to. And I was struck, the very first thing that the daily briefing from the New York Times said this morning is they were trying to address why the polls were so bad. How did they miss things so
Certainly
badly?
couldn't be the media's fault.
Couldn't be the media's fault. So what do they say? The very first reason they give for why the polling was so bad, they say, in the last few years, Republican voters seem to have become less willing to respond to polls. Maybe that shouldn't be surprising given Trump's attacks on the media, science, and other institutions.
Oh, so, it's Trump's fault.
This is exactly this from the people who
makes
have
so much sense.
Who have echoed ideas of conservative Nazis, of baskets of deplorables, bitter clingers, chumps, all of these things. They have gladly carried Obama's and Biden's and Hillary's water for these things and have pushed these narratives forward. The New York Times has learned nothing. They have learned absolutely nothing. We were the ones who were saying for months, look, there are quiet Trump voters out there who don't want to put up with the allegations. So they're not going to say, oh, yeah, I'm voting for Trump.
Well, just right now, we have this whole notion of, has there been any election fraud, or is this a perfect election? And immediately, if you are willing to say that this election wasn't perfect as a white wedding dress, then you're a conspiracy theorist. Right. You're a nutcase. You are, you don't believe in data science.
Yeah.
And
let's remember
they just start, vomiting forth
right.
all of these names and pejoratives at you, when I think there are some serious questions about this election, and we'll get into that in my time.
And they do this while saying, unity, Floyd, unity. Well, we need to come together.
They also do it in the wake of what they did in 2016 and for the 4 years after that of election fraud, Donald Trump never should have been president, according to the New York Times. The presidency was handed to him by the brilliant election marketeering of the Russians, who with $150,000 of Facebook spend something 0.1% of what Hillary Clinton spent in the state of Connecticut in 2016. Somehow the Russians handed the election to Donald Trump through their brilliant election fraud. But certainly that could not have happened this year.
We know why the polls weren't accurate. We talked about it on WJ Live repeatedly.
Yeah,
the
once or
samples
twice.
were wrong. They were oversampling Democrats. They were oversampling constituencies that
Take the next slide, guys. Put up the next slide. Just while you're talking.
no. So and the pollsters and the science of polling is broken, and they're the ones who aren't willing to follow the science.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, that's what I wanted. Look at it. This is from Real Clear Politics, and this is the set of poll averages going into November 3rd, and you can see Biden up in every single one of them dramatically. You may not be able to see the figure in the lower right-hand corner, but it was predicting Biden with about 51.3% of the vote, and Trump with 44.1% of the vote. Now, take the next slide, fellas. What actually happened this was as of about 4 or 5 hours ago.
If you
from
can
AP.
believe these numbers.
If you can
Right.
believe these numbers from AP. It turns out they weren't 7 points apart. They weren't 7.5 points apart. They were about 4 points apart. The polling was
About 3.5 there.
dramatically wrong. And they take almost no responsibility for it. Now, at the very end of this section of the email, they said, we journalists need to do a better job of conveying the uncertainty in polls. Well, tell me something I don't know. And that's little consolation after this many suppression polls that held down campaign donations, that held down volunteering.
Well, you know what they just did? They just called us the journalists. Because we're the ones that for the past 6 months have been pointing out the uncertainty in those polls. They didn't do it, and we did.
Yeah.
We always knew we were better journalists.
This is
nice
true.
to hear the New York Times say it,
George, you were just talking about how they have the nerve to say this after 2016. Another section from the email that I didn't bother putting down included a blurb where the New York Times said, now remember, polling between 2016 and today is still far more accurate than it used to be in the 20th century.
Sure.
What? What a useless statement.
Well, I love how they blame Trump for this. I mean, that is just such a New York Timesian thing to do. And I do have to disagree with you just a little bit, Josh, when you said they learned.
That's all right. It's okay to be wrong.
They've learned nothing. They have learned what readers of the New York Times want to hear. They do that really, really well. They want to hear this is all
that's fair.
Trump's fault.
You're right.
There is, in fact, something of a backlash going on against science in general. Against what I would call pseudoscience, against the expert
class, the domineering, authoritarian expert
and that
class.
includes pollsters, that includes the mainstream media, it includes literally every person who's employed by the New York Times, from the editor-in-chief down to the lowliest unpaid intern there. They're not trusted, and that has nothing to do with Donald Trump. It has to do with their own behavior.
That's why Donald Trump was elected, because of that.
Exactly.
This is a perfect time to talk about the poll I liked, which I just saw in the Western Journal, which is something like 12% of Republicans think that this was a fair and honest election.
Sounds about right to me.
That means 88% of Republicans
Have some questions.
think
Have
this thing
some
is
question.
Yeah.
Understatement of the
messed up.
podcast.
Yeah.
So
Understatement
the
of the
topic I want to
podcast.
talk about today, moving along, is there still a pathway to victory for Donald Trump? Because, as days move on, people start to wonder, today the AP, I think, added a call in Georgia for Biden,
Right.
a call in North Carolina for Trump, and then another call for Biden in Arizona.
That's right.
And so they've continued to call these different states, despite the fact that the votes aren't all counted yet, and that in Georgia at least they're in a major recount. So is there still a pathway to victory? Well, as I've researched this, there actually is a number of really interesting pathways to victory, and I wanted to talk about it. And there's really two for Donald Trump, and there's only one for Joe Biden. So Joe Biden's pathway to victory is all of these results that the AP has predicted and CNN has predicted, that those elections are in fact certified, and that using the regular order of business, electors go to wherever they go to in mid-December and they vote for Biden. That's his pathway to victory. The pathway to victory for Trump actually is kind of interesting, because as you read the Constitution, it's actually state legislatures that are specifically delegated the task of choosing what electors to send. And I was speaking with a state legislator from the state of Arizona as I was driving to the studio today, and he was telling me, that the truth is that in the legislative caucus, they're actively talking about how Katie Hobbs, the Secretary of State, who's a Democrat here, hasn't done her job. First of all, she didn't purge the voter rolls. And secondly, she didn't check very carefully whether or not people were citizens. People in Arizona are required to be citizens of the United States to vote in the presidential election. Well, according to the latest statistical studies, there are 400,000 illegal aliens in the state of Arizona, and they think that between 52 and 12,000 of them likely voted in this election. Well, this election was so close that just that one statistical anomaly would make this election invalid. And these legislators are hopping mad that Katie Hobbs, the Secretary of State here, did not do her job.
We should point out Katie Hobbs is the one who on Twitter about 2 years ago, if I recall, referred to all Trump supporters as Nazis. So,
and she
actually a dispartial.
She actually said, "I want to be elected Secretary of State so I can help Democrats get elected."
Yeah, right.
Unity, boys. Unity.
So
it's a time for unity.
I know.
Interestingly enough, one pathway to victory for Donald Trump is that the Republican majorities in the Georgia legislature, the Republican majorities in the Pennsylvania legislature, the Republican majorities in the Michigan legislature, or the Republican majorities in the Arizona legislature do something about vote fraud by saying, you know what, this race is so close and there's so many allegations of fraud, and we don't think the election officials did their job, so we're going to step in and we're going to send a group of electors to cast the ballots for our state as we are required to under the Constitution. We're ultimately responsible. And so they send a different group of electors than would come through the normal order.
Right.
That's one pathway. The other pathway is this. If, in fact, not enough of these states certify, okay, you have to realize a judge can't step in and say, you know what, this election, there's too many questions about it.
Sure.
You're not going to be allowed to certify it. And so if the election isn't certified, then what happens is if you don't get to that magic number of 270 and Biden has to certify Pennsylvania, he has to certify Georgia, he has to certify Michigan and Arizona to get to that magic number to win. If for some reason, some combination of those states don't certify their elections, then according to the Constitution of the United States, this election goes to the House of Representatives. And in fact, if it goes to the House of Representatives, based on the procedures that are outlined for that vote, Donald Trump will be elected president. So there are two pathways to victory for Donald Trump and only one for Joe Biden. And so I think that's interesting.
It is, I have to say there's something delicious to me about the idea of Nancy Pelosi's House voting Donald Trump into a second term as president. There's just something wonderful.
Bring out
about
the
that
straight
thought to
jackets,
me.
man. That will send them over the
There's
edge.
a very specific
Right. Oh, I agree with you 100%.
and determined methodology for doing that. It's not
Right.
just an open vote. Each state delegation gets a vote of one.
Right.
That means the state of California gets the same vote as the state of Wyoming. And so they may have, I don't know, 28 or 30 congressmen in California, most of which are Democrats, and they have one in the state of Wyoming, but Wyoming still gets that one vote.
Right.
So if you actually calculate it out, Donald Trump will have 27 of those 100
50,
votes,
yeah.
and he'll be reelected president by the House of Representatives.
So, two things. This is super interesting because it actually goes back to a conversation you and I were having maybe earlier this week about how the president actually is supposed to function as the head of the states, as the head.
Right.
The states are actually the ones who are
doesn't
to elect.
represent
He doesn't
us.
represent the people. He represents the states.
Represents the states.
And especially to the rest of the world. So that's an interesting tie-in. But Floyd, what do you think the chances of a faithless elector setup like you described? What do you think the chances of that in Arizona are?
I think they're probably stronger in Pennsylvania and in Michigan because of, I think there's been more voter fraud in both of those states than there's been here in Arizona. But I think that the truth is that it could happen in any state. I mean, I think it's an open question. I mean, I just talked about the question of illegals, but there's this outstanding question of the Dominion software, which we've all avoided because we're not experts in software.
We're working on that.
But the truth is that any type of software fraud or hacking, it always leaves breadcrumbs.
Absolutely.
And there is always electronic evidence of that. And I'm assuming that when the president's tweeting about it, that probably some of the best cybersecurity people in the country are actually looking at it, and they'll be able to identify if, in fact, those machines have been manipulated with, if votes have been added. There are a lot of statistical anomalies about this election that I don't believe are very probable, but I'm not an expert in the data field. There are experts in the data field that are saying this couldn't happen. I'm just not one of them.
Sure.
Yeah, the Georgia GOP had they sent a fascinating letter to the Georgia Secretary of State and said, "Our analysis of your office's publicly available data shows that the number of rejected absentee ballots in Georgia plummeted from 3.5% in 2018 to 0.3% in 2020. Now that is fascinating. You want to talk about statistics? Very strange things happening with statistics.
Well, and that's a great reason to invoke a recount and an audit. A lot of people are talking about recounts versus audits. In all practical purposes, they're the same things, or they amount to the same things. But it's not just recounting the votes you already have. It's examining those votes. If you remember, and I'm sure you guys do, the 2000 election, the recounts in Florida involved examining
they were punch card ballots.
Exactly.
And
in great detail. The hanging chads.
Butterfly ballots.
The pregnant chads. And
I don't remember pregnant
I remember
chads.
when we used to vote on those. But
Yeah.
but now, most of the states either have voter machines or they have paper ballots that are scanned by a voting machine.
Right.
And it's quite interesting that they actually work the same way, only one is scanned in and then it's tabulated by the tabulator, or it's tabulated by the tabulator when you hit the little iPad like type screen.
Right.
So, these really are just big fancy adding machines.
Yeah.
That's what they are, and they're not that technically complex. That's why, if in fact they have been hacked, or if in fact one of the allegations is that there's these algorithms that somehow generate votes based on what's happening. I don't understand it all, but I think that we are going to see this in the courts, because now I think there's something like 11 or 12 different cases that are going on.
Right.
And so these cases are going to be adjudicated in court just the way the ones in Florida were adjudicated. And remember, Al Gore was president for 35 days. And
President-elect.
yeah, president-elect.
Yeah.
Well, he thought he was
He
president.
was, yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair
A
enough.
good chunk of the country considered him the president. Yeah.
But so, yes, to answer the question that I asked at the beginning, there are multiple pathways by which Donald Trump can be reelected president. And interestingly enough, he's acting as if he is going to be reelected. The GSA still isn't, in transition mode. So we'll see how this all unfolds.
McEnany said he's planning on attending his inauguration.
Yeah, I've already got my hotel reservations.
Floyd, just quickly, I know we got to move on, but just quickly, in 30 seconds, what would the Democrats do if the states actually took a stand and said, all right, this has gone far enough. We're either not giving you enough electoral college votes or we're flipping electors.
So I think what's going to happen is absolute chaos, and I'm going to blame the media and the left for it. You remember when Biden said, I think it was because Chris Wallace asked him the question, will you claim election victory before the election is certified? And he said
no.
No, I'm not going to claim it.
He said no twice.
Yeah, not until it's certified. And the minute the AP called it, actually before it was called, he was out there, I'm president-elect, I'm announcing this is my chief of
the
staff.
President-elect,
right?
Signage
And I'm loading these people into different positions, and I want my money from the GSA, and what, so he totally disregarded what he said in the debates, which, is par for the course. He'll probably disown most of what he said during the campaign. He didn't say very much, but
Trump is the only one who has been consistent on this from the beginning. Remember, Hillary hammered him for refusing to say, "Oh, I'll accept whatever the vote total is." He was saying, "Look, if there's fraud, I may not accept it."
Sure.
He said that from the very beginning. He has not changed one iota. She is the one who said you should accept it and then refused to. And now Biden's the one who said, "I will accept it. I won't accept it." And he is trying to accept.
I loved all the stories this week about how Stacey Abrams still hasn't conceded in that governor's race in Georgia, and it's 2 years later.
Right, and she's lost by a bigger margin than in any of the three most contested states.
Yeah, some Georgia. I don't remember if it was a media member in Georgia or a politician referred to her as Leader Abrams. Leader Abrams. She has no title. Her title is Stacey Abrams.
Yeah.
Leader Abrams, dear leader.
Governor-elect Stacey Abrams of Georgia.
So
for 2 years.
I think this is a really significant time in history, though, because if there has been fraud, and there are at least anecdotal evidences of fraud right now, and there are people that are collecting affidavits and actual evidence of fraud, if there is fraud, for us as a country to come together ever, then we all have to believe that the results are accurate.
Yep.
Right.
And if the results are not accurate, then we have a process by which we adjudicate that. And part of it's in the courts, and part of it is with electors, part of it's with the legislatures that are given the responsibility of sending those electors, and part of it is with Congress. If in fact there's a dispute and we don't have an adequate number of electors for any candidate, it goes to the House of Representatives. And I think we're just going to have to work the process and take it one step at a time, but they should not be certifying elections until they're counted, number one, and then once they're counted, if there is evidence of fraud, somebody needs to take a look at it. And a judge is the best person to say,
they're used to weighing evidence.
There was fraud, there was no fraud.
Right.
And so I'm assuming
literally
that
what we pay them to do.
Judges will do their job.
Right. So one thing we're very fond of saying around here is that elections have consequences. And we've talked quite a bit this year about the consequences of a potential Joe Biden administration, because we wanted to warn the American people of what would actually, despite what he says, and sometimes because of what he says, what might actually happen under a Joe Biden administration. One of the things I'm sure you guys will remember during the final days of the campaign was Joe Biden agreeing that minor children should be allowed to go forward with changing their gender.
8-year-olds.
Right,
8-year-olds.
exactly.
Against their parents' will.
Against their parents' will. Children who do not have the right to have sex legally.
They can't even get an aspirin from the school
That's
nurse.
right. They can't give consent in any situation. They can't vote. They can't drive. They can't drink alcohol. They can't, well, I guess they can drink it. They can't buy it. They can't buy cigarettes. But they can decide to make a permanent change about their body at age 8. Now, at age 18, probably at 28, I was not mature enough to make a permanent decision about most things in my life. I mean, I still had a lot of growing up to do.
Yeah, you were in the Army.
Well, that's right. The Army helped. But certainly at age 8, I mean, I'd want to turn myself into
I don't know where
anything.
you're getting this stuff. I was drinking and smoking like crazy when I was 8.
You are from Arkansas.
I had cirrhosis when I was 8.
So
and emphysema.
The truth is I believe it's child abuse when you allow a child to inject hormones.
Of course.
That, like for a little boy, will shrink and kill his testes. Okay? And that's in essence what they're doing. They're making them eunuchs.
8-year-olds shouldn't be allowed to choose their own dinner.
So, I mean, what the procedure basically is chemical castration.
Right, sure.
And we've talked about chemical
The thing
castration
we do to sex predators.
For sex predators, but to do it on an 8, 9, 10-year-old kid, to chemically castrate them and to permanently change them with hormones is child abuse. And, I don't know where these people come up with this stuff, but it is evil. It is evil from the pit of hell as far as I'm concerned.
Imagine an 8-year-old coming to you and saying, I think I'm a pirate. I want a peg leg. And your response is, all right, no problem. Let's go to the surgeon.
Yeah.
No problem. That's what this is, and that's insane. Anybody would view it as insane, but because they couch it in terms of the LGBT movement, all of a sudden it's untouchable.
I agree with both of you gentlemen on this, but you know who doesn't agree with you is Target. Target stores just pulled a book off their shelves called Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze That's Seducing Our Daughters by Abigail Schreier. Now, full disclosure, I have not read this book. I've heard very good things about it from people who I trust. Michael Knowles was subbing for Russ today and said he knows Abigail Schreier personally and loved the book. Says she is not actually like an anti-trans writer particularly. She's just really anti-child trans, which just seems like common sense to me. But on the basis, as far as I can tell, of one complaint to Target from someone called Blue Iris 04 on Twitter, who describes herself as a trans woman.
Well, this is the same company that wanted to allow men into the female bathroom.
And they don't want to offend the men in their female bathrooms right now. That's why they're pulling it.
For that. You'd think they would have learned a lesson from that. We wrote story after story about the backlash that they suffered from that.
But it's not about learning lessons with the. I mean, you know this. I'm preaching to the choir. It's not about learning lessons with the left. It's about progressively turning up the temperature time after time. Test incrementalism, salami tactics.
So at the core, the argument here is about God. And it's about this question of, did God make a mistake? Did God, make a mistake when he created you male and female? And, that's who they're really warring with, is God. And it's sad. I want to pray for these people. I have compassion for these people. Many of these people, transgenders, are seriously mentally ill.
Right.
For years, actually, the American Psychiatric Association called transgenderism or dysphoria, sexual dysphoria, they called it a mental illness.
Just as they did homosexuality before that.
And so these are people that need compassion. They need love. They need they need us to embrace them, but the thing they don't need is hormones.
Right.
And especially as children, they don't need. There's no. We don't know how those hormones will affect them at age 40. We could be giving them all testicular cancer for all we know, or ovarian cancer for what we know, because we're taking the natural order of the hormones in children, and we're changing that natural order. We could be giving them all cancer for all we know.
And I'm certainly no medical expert, but it certainly seems to me unlikely that we have volumes of medical evidence on the effect that these kinds of treatments have on 8-year-olds.
There were no cases. There were no statistically significant cases until 2 days ago.
So forget about science. Forget about being the party of science, the science believers. They're just doing, I mean, you are correct 100%, Floyd. This is a spiritual issue, not even a scientific issue. These people have become the science deniers.
Yeah, they are the science deniers. But what's even worse are these Fortune 500 companies, these major firms like Target and Johnson & Johnson, and you can just sit and name them all afternoon, that have embraced this woke, left-wing craziness over the system that built them.
Right.
And,
that's right.
Target is a great company, was a great company, and why they're embracing this kind of just kookiness, you have to wonder. They're not doing their shareholders, and they're not living up to their fiduciary responsibility to do this. But I think what happens is, when in doubt, they just pull any product.
The one thing
go along to get along.
Yeah, the one thing that I think could be redeeming to Target at this point is if this tweet from Ask Target that said, "Thank you so much for bringing this to our attention. We've removed this book from our assortment." I hope that was written by some minimum wage customer service representative who gave it no thought at all. I fear that's not the case, but I hope that's true, because if that is true, then some, actual thoughtful, career-minded individual might be able to step in and rectify the situation before Target sees another backlash like they did 2 years ago, 3 years ago with the transgender.
In the meantime,
bathrooms.
These companies are embracing radical philosophies to the detriment of their bottom line. We look at these different news media companies, for example, all of which have been decimated financially in their news divisions, ABC, NBC, CBS, as they have gotten CNN, as they've gotten more extreme, as they've gotten more left-wing. Most of them have been hurt financially. The one exception to that is the New York Times, which was able to build a subscriber base
of Trump haters.
That's
right.
But
good luck with that in the next 4 years, boys.
Yeah. But most of them are seeing their bottom lines hurt by this. And you have to wonder, they're sure not doing what they should for their shareholders.
Well, go ahead, Josh. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, Dr. Paul McHugh, a psychiatrist at Johns Hopkins University, he said that the transgender movement among children is dangerous and reckless. Reckless and irresponsible. And he said it is comparable to doing frontal lobotomies.
Yeah,
well, professor at Johns Hopkins.
It is chemical castration of young boys.
And that is the science that a Biden administration, if we have one, a Biden-Harris administration, has promised to follow and support, because elections have consequences. So,
and
by the way, if you are a Christian who conscientiously objected to Donald J. Trump, you refuse to vote for him, you got to own this. If Biden ends up being president and this stuff goes in, you got to own this.
And if young men are chemically castrated because of your vote,
own it,
or lack of it,
own it.
Yeah, and we
have
know,
the intellectual integrity.
We know
to own
many more children are going to die in the womb as a result of this vote.
Yeah, there's no question.
And that blood is crying out to God,
and He will answer, and that will be a great and terrible day. And as Floyd said on that happy note, this has been WJ Live. The truth is,
we're just three happy-go-lucky guys.
The truth is, look, we've said this before, we'll say it again. Jesus is on the throne. Elections do have consequences, but they don't have the eternal consequences of the choices that we make to accept or to reject Jesus Christ, who is our Savior and the center of what we do here.
Well, most nations on earth are a mess. The United States is like that. That's why I choose to be a citizen of heaven.
Amen. And on that happy note, this has been WJ
Way to
Live.
save it. Way to save it, Floyd.
Thank you for joining us. We're here every Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. I'm starting to say that like I actually believe it now. 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. Again, find us on youtube.com/WJ Live. We are on Facebook. We are, of course, wherever you find your
everywhere.
podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, any of those places. Find us, like us, follow us, subscribe to us. We will keep bringing you the truth.
Share us.
Please share us. We will keep bringing you the truth as best we know how every day, every afternoon here from gorgeous, sunny Arizona. So for now, see you later and see you next time.
Hi, my name is Samantha, and I'm the community manager for the Western Journal. We've really enjoyed recording WJ Live these last few weeks, and we have some exciting news.
We are now on Apple Podcasts, but we need to ask you a favor.
In order to equip even more listeners with the truth and fight against big tech,
we need to get more subscribers and reviews.
So please, go find WJ Live on Apple Podcasts. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a 5-star review. Oh, and tell them you want to see more of me on the podcast.
Thank you for helping us out. And don't forget that you can catch a new episode of WJ Live every Tuesday and Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific on YouTube and now Apple Podcasts.